It actually had the opposite effect of making me a better reader. Go in and just read the freaking book. Don't overthink it. I annotated very heavily and I ended up hating 100% bet my life on it. Wow, like I'm getting it. Sort of out of character for me. Are you regretting it yet? Just freaking let her rip. What am I even saying? Hi, I'm Sam. I would say there's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I have had a couple people comment over the last few months asking me to go into more detail about my annotation process. So I thought that that is what we could do today. I do want to start off with some disclaimers that I am not a professional when it comes to annotating or really anything regarding literature or reading or writing. I don't have any formal training in reading and literary analysis. I can probably count on one hand how many literature classes I had to take for my schooling. I guess just go in understanding that this is probably very chaotic and might not make sense to anyone except for me. Starting out as a reader in my adulthood, I really have only started reading probably in the last 3 years. Probably 2022 is my first year really reading a lot as an adult. And I would say when I first started out, I was definitely in the camp of not really wanting to write in my books or, destroy them in any way. But I have since evolved as a reader, and I sort of see reading as a creative endeavor as well as, just like me consuming something. So in reading a text and annotating it, I think that it can be transformed and it can become something really personal. I do write inside my books and I underline and things like that. And while that might seem like to other people like I'm ruining my book, I think that that's kind of a narrow point of view, because while I might be ruining it from like a capitalistic mindset, I'm decreasing its market value, I would argue that I'm increasing its value for me personally. One person's decreasing in value is another person's increasing in value. So I think all of these books are really valuable to me in one way or another. So to get into a little bit more of my process, I guess I can just show you, like, these are the sticky tabs that I use. I like to use ones that when I turn them sideways will cover the full width of the page, because then I like to use the straight edge of the sticky tabs to make a straight line under the text. I obviously like the different colors and I like to color coordinate with the cover of the book, but you really don't have to. I think when I first started annotating, I thought I needed to have a color for characters, a color for language, a color for all these other things. And I think I've kind of pulled back on that a little bit, because for me, it's really important that this doesn't feel like a chore and it doesn't feel like homework. So whatever is going to make it easier for me is best. So I don't really use a lot of tools. I really just use a pen, and I like to have sticky tabs that are kind of like this longer format. It is kind of nice to have the clear background too, because then you can really see where exactly the line is going to be. I think that's kind of type A though, which is sort of out of character for me, but for some reason I really don't like squiggly lines under my text. So those are the only tools that I use. I don't really know for sure if I'm going to annotate a book before I start reading it, but there are books that going in, I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like this. So I will pick out a set of sticky tabs preemptively and use this as my bookmark while I'm reading. But there are examples of books where I went in thinking this is for sure gonna have so many sticky tabs, so many underlines. And then by the end, I really only had a few moments where it stood out to me. So that happened for me with I Who Have Never Known Men. This is a really universally beloved book, and I thought that I was gonna really get a lot out of it. And while I do think it was a really valuable reading experience, and I did like the book, it wasn't totally knock my socks off out of this world for me. And you can kind of see I only have a few sticky tabs of parts that stood out to me. I don't think you should feel like you have to annotate a certain amount. And if you get to the end of a book and you really love it, but then you haven't annotated a ton, it means that it really wasn't that good of a book. The less you think about your annotation process, I think the better. I think just sort of go in and just read the freaking book. Don't overthink it, And for me, it's just typically language that stands out to me. Really, this is something that I think future me will want to look back on. And when she does, she'll look back on it fondly, or she'll laugh. So there are times where I really feel super motivated to annotate a ton of a book. So that obviously happened for me when I read Threats. I've actually read this, I think 3 times, but I originally listened to this on audiobook, and then I got a physical copy and reread it to annotate it. And obviously, because it was a reread, I sort of had an advantage, because I like already kind of knew what the characters were like. So it was easier for me to clock like, oh, this is foreshadowing. This is a character development moment. So with this, I had a lot of fun really analyzing it very deeply. And I think the idea of reading something very deeply is also kind of closely tied with annotating. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. Like, there's so much pressure on like reading the quote unquote right way and making sure you're reading things deeply enough. And, while I do want to encourage people to consume their media mindfully, I don't want it to go like too far the other way where you're like so paralyzed by the concept that you might be not reading it the right way, or like you're not going to annotate it the right way, so you just don't do it, even though you're like kind of interested in getting into annotating books. So I say just freaking let her rip, just freaking do it. I will say I have learned a lot about myself as a reader through annotating and a lot about my annotating process. As I've done more, that's just like anything you do. The more you do it, the more you're going to be able to tweak it and optimize it into something that works best for you. So I want to give you an example of a book that I annotated very heavily and I ended up hating. So that is Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Doblin. I'm not going to get into the synopsis or anything of this, but you can go watch, I think it was like in one of my worst books of the year videos, so you can go watch that if you are interested. But as you can see, I really did annotate this quite a lot. This took me like months to read because it is a pretty dense classic. And, I would like to think that I read this pretty deeply and, I sticky tabbed a lot and I analyzed it. But at the end of this, I did not find this to be a valuable reading experience. In fact, I think this put me into a reading slump. So it actually had the opposite effect of making me a better reader. It kind of put my reading on pause. So again, I really don't want you to feel pressured to like, oh, I have to make sure I'm reading really deeply because that's the only way to read and enjoy it or read the right way. Because that's just not the case. So this was sort of the first time, or at least one of the first times where I was like, maybe even books that I'm pretty sure I'm going to love, if I fully commit to annotating right at the beginning, I'm still going to hate them at the end, So that was an aspect of me wanting to use my library more. But another aspect is just that I really don't like to buy books before I've read them. So obviously, not having a physical copy of a book, but wanting to annotate a book are kind of at odds with one another. And I kind of struggled with that for a while because I didn't want to just keep buying books like Berlin Alexanderplatz, where I was pretty sure I was going to love them. And thus I started immediately full sending, annotating, underlining, writing in the margins and things like that. I didn't want to keep doing this and then just sort of like saddling myself with books that I didn't like. Even though I do still think that this is a transformed piece, it's now become like a very personal item for me. I just don't want to own a lot of books that I don't love. All that to say, I really wanted to try to continue annotating books in a way that was still optimal for me being able to read books from the library. Hurricane Girl by Marcy Dramansky. I originally read this from the library. So what I do is when I have a library book, I'll just use the sticky tabs. So when I come across a passage or something that I like, I'll just put a sticky tab and then keep going. And then by the end of the book, if I'm like, wow, that was really good, I really loved it, I would love to have a physical copy for my collection. What I'll do is I'll keep the sticky tabs in the library version, and then once my physical copy arrives, I'll literally just transfer the tabs over. And then, that does force me to do a little bit of rereading, but it's usually just like, the page that I have put a sticky tab in. And it's kind of cool too, because it forces me to revisit those passages where I've put a sticky tab and really reflect on them. Was this actually really impactful? Was it cool? Was it funny? Was it remarkable? There are times where I have a library book loaded up with sticky tabs and then I kind of go back and review and it's like, yeah, this was fun and I had a good time with it, but I actually in hindsight don't really think I need to revisit this again. So it sort of gives you this nice flexibility of whether you want to fully commit with the underlining and writing in the margins, or if you kind of just want to let the reading process be what it was and move on to the next book. I also really like this process because obviously you're not writing notes in the library book, but you've read the whole book and then you're going back and revisiting parts that you liked. And then it's interesting to kind of look back on those once you have the full story as well. So I find that it actually improves my note-taking and my mindfulness and my reflection of my reading experience. So I honestly probably do this with most of my books, and I'll do that with books I already own too with my physical TBR. I won't commit to underlining. I'll go through, read it, sticky tab, and then it's the same process as with library books where after I'm completely done reading it, I'll go back and revisit all the sticky tabbed parts and decide from there if I want to unhaul it or fully commit to the underlining. This can also be done with ebooks as well. So I originally read The Dinner by Herman Cook as an ebook from the library, and my e-reader allows you to highlight passages. This does make it a little bit tougher because the page numbers don't completely match over very easily. But if you just keep track of like, okay, this is this chapter, and then you kind of just skim through the physical book and find the part that you're looking for, it's really not that tough. So then you can put sticky tabs and have a physical copy from there. Another pro of annotating this way, where you sort of do it retroactively, is there are books where sometimes I find myself wanting to annotate a ton or sticky tab and underline a ton. So 2 examples of that were Stoner and Butcher's Crossing, both by John Williams. So he's an author that I love, and I just feel like I was basically underlining something on every single page. But especially with Butcher's Crossing, I felt like it kind of disrupted the flow of my reading. So, I started out and I was really like underlining a lot, making notes in the margins right away, because this is a book that I was sure I was going to love, like 100% bet my life on it. And I was right. So I was kind of doing like the full annotating process from the beginning, but then it kind of just felt like, yes, I was reading deeply and like engaging with the text very deeply, but it was sort of getting in the way of me actually reading the story, if that makes sense. So what I ended up doing then is I would still put sticky tabs at parts where I was like, okay, I want to come back to that, but I wouldn't in real time underline and make notes in the margins. I would just sort of like put a sticky tab and like let it keep flowing to really kind of like stay in the groove and stay with the characters and the language and everything. So I think this method of annotating works really well for me personally, because it allows me to engage with the text in a way that feels very meaningful and mindful and reflective for me personally, without getting in the way of the actual reading. Another book that I read and annotated that I want to highlight is The Cormorant by Stephen Gregory. This is one that I annotated very early on, so this was before I had kind of optimized my whole process. I think it's probably the most organic form of annotating that I did. This was a book where I started reading it, and obviously I had never read it before. I was going in blind, so I didn't know, but after only a few pages, I had this really clear sense of the characters, and specifically I saw this duality between how the main character referred to the bird versus like everyone else, and like the different contexts that those different naming devices were used. And that just felt cool to me. It made me feel like, wow, like I'm getting it, So that compelled me to kind of start annotating more about like the character development and the relationships and dynamics between the main character and the bird. And again, you won't necessarily get that spark right away with everything you read. And I think that's okay. Like, again, to go back to Threats, I really didn't have that same spark from the beginning, but this obviously ended up being my favorite book of all time. And again, there is something really special about revisiting a book you've already read and then annotating, because you have that advantage of knowing how things are going to turn out. Another book I read and annotated, but I didn't end up really liking, was YN by Esther Gee. But this is still really valuable to me because I did this as a buddy read. This was also the first time where I felt like really compelled to write a lot of notes. So sometimes you might feel like, oh, I have way too much to write and not enough space in the margins. So this was the first time I actually used clear sticky notes. And I wrote notes on those and then pasted them onto the book pages. They're kind of nice because then they don't cover up the text, and you have this bigger space to write something. Yeah, so it looks like in this book I had like a sticky note that I basically made notes of at the end of every chapter. So I think that that's kind of a cool way to do it, because then you have this sort of like little summary at the end of every chapter. So there are times where I either read a book from the library or I read a physical copy of a book from my physical TBR. And when I get to the end, I'm sort of on the fence of, do I actually want to annotate this book? Do I actually want to keep this? So 3 really good examples of that for me were Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I annotated it a ton, but it still felt very 3 stars for me by the end. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This I felt more of a obligation to enjoy and really love and keep on my shelf, because he's just such a prolific, important author. And then very similarly, Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. I felt like this, almost like this duty as a lover of literature, to keep these books. And what I do then is I will keep the sticky tabs in them and I won't actually underline anything yet. And then, yeah, they can just sit on my shelf. They can wait. They can chill there. But then, I probably go through my shelves a couple times a year to see if I can unhaul anything or want to get rid of anything. And usually if these kinds of books stand the culling after a few rounds, then clearly I'm attached to them in some way that I think makes them valuable enough to keep. So that is mostly my annotation process. I guess the only other thing I'll say is that at the end of reading a book I've really loved and annotated the heck out of, I'll still kind of feel like I have a lot of thoughts about it. So I do occasionally write reviews in my journal, and I feel like that kind of helps me work out all my feelings and thoughts. And it is really fun then to look back on a book that I've annotated in addition to what I wrote in my reading journal. It's just a lot of fun, and I feel like I get a lot of not just fulfillment from reading, but again, it feels like this sort of creative fulfillment as well. I have transformed the work in a way that's 100% personal to me. It's 100% unique. No one else will ever annotate the same book in the same exact way you will. So I think that there's something really special and really valuable about that. So I don't know. I know at the beginning of this I was like, guys, don't overthink it. Just read your books and do what you want. But I feel like I just explained the most overthinking process ever. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone is going to get anything useful out of this. But for those of you who asked me what my annotation process is, are you regretting it yet? Yeah, I don't know. That felt very chaotic. I don't ever script anything, but this is the first time I'm like, damn, I maybe should have at least jotted down a couple of bullet points. But I guess if you have any other questions, let me know. You can like this video if you want, comment. How do you annotate? Do you annotate your books? Are there any ways that you think I could optimize my annotating even more? Let me know. You could subscribe. You could watch my other videos, and I'll see you in whatever video I make next. Love you guys. Bye.